Today we're going to talk about JavaScript array methods. And one way that I like to learn them is to first try them out, but then to make sure I completely understand them, I usually try to make my own version of the array function and then try it out to see that I get the same result from my own implementation as the original one. And in this video we're going to focus on the array.every function. So let's jump into the code. Okay, so let's talk about the every function. And a good place to start would be the documentation. So I'm on the MDN website, and we see that array.every takes two parameters. One is a callback function and another one is the this argument. So if we talk first about the callback function, it will take a function, and to the callback function the every will pass in different things. The first parameter is the current element being processed. The second one is the index of that element in the array, and the third one is the full array. And if we go back to the this argument, that is the value to use as this when executing callback. And we're gonna first try out this every function and console log out all these values so that we understand how the array.every works. And then we're gonna try to create our own version of the every function and see if we are able to do it. And I was actually going to compare apples. So let's first try out the normal every function. So we'll say, just for clarity, that this is the standard every. All apples are green, because that's what we're going to check with the every function. So we do another console log, and we say that let's try with the green apples. Green apples dot every. First parameter is the callback function. So we have a function, and that one took 3 parameters. So it's the current apple, it's the index, and it's the apples array in this case. And for the this we'll use green apples. Or let's leave the this first, try without it first. Let's console log apple and the index and apples. We also need to return something from this function that will be the thing that we check for every apple. So we were going to check if all the apples were green. So we do apple equals a green apple. So now we see that it loops 2 times. Here's 1 time and here's the second time, and the index is increased. And the end result is that we got true back for every item in the array, and that's what every does. So if we switch this to mixed apples, we should get false. For this second apple here, which is red, it's not going to return true. So then the whole every will return false. Now let's add the this argument. So that will be after the function, and we should, before we add it, let's console log this. So we see that now this is the global object or the window object. So if I pass in mixed apples, we see that instead of this being the global window object, it becomes that array. And if I change that to green apples, it becomes that array. So that is the behavior that we want to achieve in our own every function that we are going to write now. So let's write our own custom every up here. So I will comment this out and I will say function custom every so it took in two parameters. One was the callback function, we can call that CB, and the second one was the this arg. So since we get an array here, we need to do a loop. So I will do a for loop, const item of this, and to get also the index in a for loop, in a for of loop, we can do a neat little destructuring here. So we do index an item like that, and we call this just entries. So first let's just console log these two. Index item. So I will call customEvery, but I will need to add it so that the function belongs to the array prototype. So the way to do that is to do array.prototype every, or we'll call it custom every here because we don't want to change an existing value to the prototype. So we'll do custom every is custom every. So now we should be able to do mixed apples dot custom every. And now that I called it like this, we see the console logs of here. So we get the index and the item. So far everything seems correct. And then for every item we want to run the callback function, the one that we made here that makes a check that returns true or false. And if they all return true, we want to return true from this custom every, but if any of them returns false, we want to return false. So let's do an if check in here. So we can do a callback, and then we should pass in the item, the index, and this. And if this fails, we know that we should always return false. But if we haven't returned false, that means that they all were true. So down here we can return true. And now that we're calling this callback function, we also need to pass in a function. So let's reuse this function here. Okay, and let's remove the console log for this. So was this correct now? We used mixed apples, so they are not all green, so it should return false. So we console log the apple, the index, and the full array, the second apple, the index of that one, and the full array, and then it returns false. So that is correct indeed. So we should try it for the green apples and see if we get true back, and we do. So we have the basis for our every function working now, but we are not yet handling the this arg. So the this arg we need to change the way that this callback is executing. Because if we go back to the documentation, see that the value to use as this when executing callback. And there is an easy way to do this in JavaScript, and that is to do cb.call, and then the first item is the this arg. So then we can do this arg like this. But you see, it still works. But what if, like right now, let's add a console log here to see what this is. Because now we're not really passing in a this arg. But what if we pass in green apples as the this arg? Yeah, that seemed to work good. And mixed apples. Yeah. So if we pass in a weird value to call, it seems to fall back to the window global object. So maybe this is fine. I do think it is a good idea to implement your own versions of these common JavaScript functions, because it gives some more understanding on how they might work under the hood. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you did, please consider being a subscriber to the channel. And if you liked it, like with the like button. And I think the next function to do this with, if you want to continue on this track, would be to try the any function, which has a very similar behavior to this function, but it's the opposite. So if just one returns true, we should return true for the whole any call. So I think if you want to challenge yourself and try to make your own custom any, I think it would be quite easy to continue from what we have here and achieve that. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.